Right now, you're probably doing one of two things with your spare cash. Either you're putting it into an offset account, watching your mortgage interest shrink each month, feeling like you're making solid progress, or you're buying ETFs, drip feeding money into the share market, hoping the long term growth does the heavy lifting for you. Both feel responsible. Both seem smart on paper. But over the next 10 or 20 years, one of these paths will leave you significantly wealthier than the other. And the gap is bigger than most people realize because almost nobody sits down and runs the actual numbers across both strategies side by side. Let's start with the offset account. An offset account is a regular transaction account that's linked to your variable rate home loan. Whatever balance you keep in that account gets subtracted from your loan before interest is calculated. So if your mortgage is $600,000 and you've got $80,000 sitting in the offset, your lender only charges interest on $520,000. That $80,000 isn't earning you interest in the traditional sense. Instead, it's stopping interest from being charged against you. And here's the part that hooks people. The money you save on interest is completely tax-free. You don't report it. You don't pay a cent to the ATO on it. It's not income. It's simply interest you were never charged. At today's rates, with the RBA cash rate at 4.35% and most variable home loans sitting around 6%, your $80,000 in an offset is effectively giving you a 6% return that the tax office can't touch. If you're earning a decent salary and sitting on a 37% marginal tax rate, that 6% tax-free return is the equivalent of roughly 9.5% in a taxable investment. That's a number that makes a lot of people stop looking for alternatives. No volatility, no risk of loss, no watching your balance drop 15% in a bad quarter. Just a clean, consistent benefit every single month. Now let's talk about what happens when you take that same $80,000 and put it into ETFs instead. Exchange-traded funds give you access to hundreds or even thousands of companies through a single purchase on the ASX. In Australia, funds like VAS track the top 300 listed companies. International options like VGS spread your money across large companies in developed markets around the world. The Australian share market has returned an average of about 13% per year since 1980, including dividends and franking credits. Even after you adjust for inflation, long-term real returns on Australian equities come in around 7 to 8%. Over the past 5 years, broad market ETFs have delivered somewhere between 8 and 11% per year depending on the fund, and some international ETFs have done even better than that. So just looking at the raw numbers, ETFs come out ahead. More growth, more compounding, a bigger balance at the end. But here's where it gets more complicated. ETF returns are not guaranteed in any individual year. In 2022, many broad market ETFs fell between 5 and 10%. During the GFC, the Australian market dropped over 40%. If you'd invested $80,000 right before that crash, your portfolio could have fallen below $48,000. And while markets eventually recover, that experience changes people. It causes panic selling. It causes hesitation. It makes people abandon their strategy right when they should be holding firm. Meanwhile, the person who kept $80,000 in their offset saved exactly the same amount of interest that month as the month before, regardless of what the market did. That kind of consistency has real psychological value, especially when your mortgage is large and your financial margin is thin. Then there's the tax side, and this is where things are shifting in 2026. The federal budget announced that starting from July 2027, the current 50% capital gains tax discount is being scrapped. In its place, there's a new system where your CGT discount is based on actual inflation indexation, and there's a minimum 30% tax rate on capital gains. What this means for you as an ETF investor is that the old deal, hold for 12 months, get half the gain tax-free, is going away. Under the new rules, the discount depends on how much inflation has moved during the time you held the asset. In some years, that might work out better for you. In low inflation years, it could work out worse. And the 30% minimum tax floor means that even if your marginal rate is lower, you're still paying at least 30 cents on every dollar of gain. Your offset account doesn't care about any of this. The savings you get from an offset are structural. There's no income being created, no capital gain being triggered, no legislative change that can erode the benefit. The interest simply doesn't get charged, and that's the end of it. So does that make the offset account the winner? Not so fast. Because here's what happens when you stretch the timeline out and let compounding do its thing. Over 20 years, assuming a conservative average ETF return of 8% per year after fees and accounting for tax, your $80,000 grows to roughly $373,000. That same $80,000 kept in an offset account on a 6% variable mortgage saves you about $170,000 in total interest over a 25-year loan. That's a difference of more than $200,000 in your favor if you chose ETFs. And the longer you leave it, the wider that gap stretches, because compounding accelerates as the invested balance grows. But the offset strategy has something going for it that never shows up in a spreadsheet comparison. When you reduce your mortgage balance faster, sometimes shaving 5 or 7 years off the loan, all the money that was going toward repayments suddenly becomes available. Every dollar of that former repayment can now go straight into investments, into super contributions, into building wealth without any debt hanging over you. The offset doesn't just save interest, it compresses the entire debt timeline, and everything that happens after the mortgage is gone changes dramatically. There's also a third approach that ties both of these strategies together, and it's something more experienced investors in Australia are using right now. It's called debt recycling. Here's how it works. You put your spare cash into the offset account, which reduces your loan balance. Then you redraw that amount and invest it into income-producing assets like ETFs. Because the redrawn money is now being used for investment purposes, the interest on that portion of your loan becomes tax deductible. You've taken non-deductible mortgage debt and converted it into deductible investment debt. You still get the benefit of holding ETFs for long-term growth, but now the interest cost of that investment is reducing your taxable income every year. It's one of the most effective legal wealth-building structures available to Australians who own a home and have a mortgage. So what's the real answer here? If your goal is to maximize total wealth over 15 to 20 years, and you can handle the ups and downs of the share market without making emotional decisions, ETFs will almost certainly leave you better off. But if your cash flow is tight, if your mortgage keeps you up at night, or if a 20% portfolio drop would push you to sell everything and walk away, then the offset account is genuinely the smarter move for you right now. The real wealth gets built when you understand how these two tools work together instead of treating them like an either-or decision. Use the offset to build safety, to crush the mortgage faster, and to give yourself breathing room. Use ETFs to build long-term growth outside of the home. And when the time is right, use debt recycling as the bridge between both, turning dead debt into productive, tax-effective wealth. The most expensive mistake isn't picking the wrong strategy between these two options. It's having $80,000 sitting in a regular savings account earning 4% while your mortgage charges you 6% and the share market returns 10%. If this video opened your eyes to something you hadn't really thought about, do me a favor and hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next one. I will see you there.